playing in an outdoor arena where the crowd wasn't that effective and the sun and blah, blah, blah. We'll get his take on all that and what he actually thought of Gonzaga and North Carolina in the finals, Vint.
Yeah, it was a terrific experience. It's a big venue, so it's University of Phoenix Stadium. It's an enclosed dome, but they have sort of windows, so it was very bright, and it actually lent a nice element. There were 77,000 there for the Final Four games, for the semifinal games between Gonzaga and South Carolina.
No?
It was second most in Final Four history.
Okay. Oh, that's a lot.
Exactly. Yeah, it was second most in Final Four history. So Gonzaga was the first game of the Final Four against South Carolina, and then North Carolina was playing Oregon for the second game, and it was very interesting because they do both of the games on the same day. So they have at 3:00 the Gonzaga and South Carolina were playing, right, and they sort of sell the seats in sections. So they cut it right down half court. On one corner, it was North Carolina fans, so you could see all the powder blue, and then it was the Gonzaga fans on one side of the court, and then on the other side of the court, it was the Oregon fans, and then the South Carolina fans, and then on the ends of where the end lines underneath the buckets, behind the buckets, right, they clear those seats out after each game and give it to students. So it's a student section. So it was Gonzaga and South Carolina on the ends, and then North Carolina and Oregon on the ends. It was very interesting. That big of a crowd, it was sort of diffused. You didn't quite get that big game atmosphere, at least where I was sitting, which was kind of far away. And it's a football stadium.
Yeah,
right. It's a football stadium. Though my friend who gave me the tickets for this game went to the championship game, and he said the atmosphere was definitely different. Obviously, when you split the crowd into fourths, you're gonna get it split.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you split it in two, and it was a much bigger deal. And so the Final Four games really promised to be great. A lot of good defensive teams, and North Carolina, I think, didn't so much win as survive. They really tried to cough it up against Oregon. They shot 38% against Oregon, and then only 37% against Gonzaga. So it wasn't a stellar, blow the doors off of the NCAA world. They just sort of survived, and it looked like they were going to give away that game against Oregon. And Gonzaga was a 6.5 to 7.5, depending on when it was, a favorite against the South Carolina Gamecocks. But South Carolina, very tough defense. And I told you, when we talked about that last week, I thought that was too big a spread for the kind of defense that they were playing. And so that was a game I would have taken, South Carolina plus the 7 points, or 7.5 when I would have got it. And I think it ended up 6.5. It had moved to 6.5. And so South Carolina played really good defense, but again, they just weren't quite the team that Gonzaga was. And Gonzaga looked terrific. They shot 48% from the field against South Carolina, and they just did not show up against North Carolina. And like I said, the Tar Heels survived is really what they did. They had some good players. Jackson was terrific, and Meeks was terrific in both games. But then, and we were texting about it. The referees just took over that game. It was just ugly. There was no rhythm. There was no flow to the game. They were fouling guys out. Everybody was in foul trouble. It just took forever to play that half. And from a viewer's standpoint, and you could tell in texts to my friends who were at the game, they were saying, the crowd level was way up here, and then as they started calling more and more fouls and being involved in the game, the refs took over. The energy just went down. But but the Tar Heels are a great team. They're a terrific team. Gonzaga is going to lose their big guy Shem Karnowski, but they've got the two big freshmen in Collins and Tilley. Nigel Williams-Goss is a junior, but we'll see if he's coming back. They're going to be locked and loaded for another season. And
maybe their showing here is going to give the NCAA and the boys back east a little bit better view of the fact that this is a legitimate and program that needs to be looked at. And I know a lot of the pollsters were upset when Gonzaga ended up, finally got to number one because they're the only undefeated team left. Maybe this will show people that they belong to be there. This is a good team that Mark Few's built a good program, and it's not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, 2 losses.
Can't beat that.
Yeah, exactly. They were terrific.
Vince, one of the things I wanted to ask you is you just pointed out it's mid-30s of shooting percentage. Are these venues now way too big for these guys to actually play? I mean, should the NCAA look at going back to a regular basketball arena? Because, 77,000 people in to watch about, and I know it's been like this for quite a while. But I was wondering about that. I was wondering, is it good defense or is it just poor shooting because of the background?
Well, it was a little bit of both, and we talked about the Ken Palm defensive adjusted defensive ratings in the last podcast, and I think that these teams were definitely very good defensively, and the resulting shot percentage was indicative of that. However, those stadiums are just really cavernous, and there's a lot of space back there, and it's not typical like what you would see in a college basketball venue. And so when you've got something like 77,000, it has an effect. It's huge. It was another probably 70 yards from the basket to the next seats. It's a long, it's a long ways, and depth perception, it clearly had an effect. But again, I don't think that was the excuse in the second game for Gonzaga. I think maybe the game got a little too big for them, and then the flow just went away when the referees just started blowing the whistle on everything. They were blowing the whistle on off-ball calls, and just didn't let them bang. And it kind of reminded me of a Pac-12 game. The way the Pac-12 referees call those games, and so. It was unfortunate, to not see those guys kind of getting up and down. But I think that those were a factor. Good defensive teams, shooting percentage goes down. These big cavernous stadiums shooting in, depth perception is off. That had an impact as well. It's not going to happen. They're not going to change that. They're selling 77,000 tickets for a reason, and they're not going to go back to even a 30,000 stadium or something like that. They're going to keep them in arenas like this and selling more tickets. I just wish that at least on the ends they could sort of cordon it off a little bit, maybe put some backdrop so it's easier. Baseball players have a tough time adjusting when there's a backdrop.
I think they used to do that in the past, right? They used to have a set of stands and then a big backdrop. And now I didn't see that at all.
It was all seats.
Yeah,
it was all seats, and there was a log jam. In a football game, behind, they don't seat a lot of guys behind in the end zone. Right. That's not an optimal seat for an NFL game. And so those aisles are tiny, but 77,000 basketball fans, where it's 2 teams playing, and you're a fan of, say, North Carolina when South Carolina and Gonzaga's playing, and you got to go get a drink or use the restroom or something. It was a log jam. We were like fish swimming upstream. At one point, they had this directional thing going. You only walk this way on this side and only walk this way on the other side. And we were stuck.
They have the flag man out there.
Oh, it was terrible. It was terrible. So at one point, we just looked at it. We don't need a pretzel that bad. Let's go back. But we had a good time, and it was a great atmosphere. And it was the first Final Four on the West Coast in decades.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so in decades.
San Diego and Wooden won it. Was that the last?
Maybe. It's been decades, but in the 64 team era, it's been the first Final Four.
Just let the players decide it. That's my only view. Referees don't have to be the spotlight. They don't have to be the main focus of attention. Just let the players play, and you don't let things get out of hand, but you can't make them change their style for one game after they've played the way they've played all year.
That's probably one of the hardest things. And I know it happens in baseball, say in the World Series, when you've got, they switch the home plate umpire, so it's a different strike zone, and you have to adapt and you have to adjust. This wasn't like that. The guys didn't just go, okay, I get it now. I understand that when I guard off ball, that he's going to call that, or it was. It felt like they just wanted to infuse themselves in the game, and it was sort of ugly in that regard. But for North Carolina fans, it was beautifully ugly.
And isn't it the best 3 referees due to statistics throughout the whole year get that final
Do
game?
they rate all the? I know the
I think
NBA rates are
they
refs.
do rate them, and there's a hierarchy, and they elevate them. But again, it didn't feel that way. It didn't feel that way, and I think that there's also sort of that feeling. It's like when you get a guy who thinks he's the best, or feels like he's the best, and he's earned that. I think, refs are human, and they start to say, I'm going to put myself in this game. I'm going to call this tight, where you just would have preferred for them to, let them play a little bit, Now,
the real question is, were the South Carolina fans rooting for Gonzaga against North Carolina? Or were they not there?
I didn't see that game, but the North Carolina fans, for instance, were not rooting, because it was the South Carolina and Gonzaga game was the first game of the afternoon,
right.
and then it was North Carolina, Oregon. It seemed like Gonzaga fans were rooting for Oregon,
yeah, I would think.
But North Carolina fans were absolutely not rooting for South Carolina. I'm not sure they were rooting for Gonzaga, and if they were rooting for South Carolina, it was because they thought, we'll beat them easily. The Gonzaga game is going to be a little tougher.